Hello, and thank you for joining me for The Wisdom of Wealth, a show where we help educate Canadians about fundamental financial literacy topics to help you make better and more informed decisions and to know when and where to reach out for help. I'm Jason Pereira, and I have the privilege of being your host. Today on The Wisdom of Wealth, we're going to talk about something that many Canadians seem obsessed with: real estate. Real estate can both be a place to live and an investment if you own it. Today we're going to talk about real estate from three different perspectives: renting, buying, and investing. Let's start with renting. The myth I hear most often about renting is that it's like burning money. After all, aren't you just paying someone else's mortgage? Well, not really. It's not that simple. Your expenses as a renter are obviously rent, insurance, and in some cases, utilities. All of those expenses, once spent, leave you with nothing to show for it other than the roof over your head. So sure, it seems like you're burning money. But this belief is not true. If we define burning money as expenses that you don't get anything back for, compare that to the cost of ownership. When you own a property, you have several expenses, including mortgage interest, taxes, utilities, condo fees if you own a condo, and maintenance on the property. And most of those you never see anything back for as well. In fact, it's estimated that maintaining your home costs on average 1% of the value per year. Sure, you could simply choose not to renovate and upkeep your home, but if you do, in the long run, your property value will suffer. When you compare the amounts you are burning as an owner versus a renter, in many cases, renting can actually make more sense than buying. Renting also frees up your savings to invest that money that you haven't put into real estate. Buying your home is often the biggest financial decision most people make in their lives. Unfortunately, it can also be the biggest mistake they make if they're not careful and consider all the costs. The first set of costs you have to deal with are acquisition costs. These are costs associated with buying a home. They include land transfer tax, legal fees, closing costs to reimburse the previous owner for any prepaid taxes or utilities, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation insurance if you have a high-ratio mortgage, and if you are selling the home for the first time, your real estate agent is going to take fees as well. Add it all up, and you're looking at, on the low end, between 1% and 2%. But it can get upwards to 8% to 9% on the high end. It's pretty expensive. So my first piece of advice is move as little as possible, because buying and selling homes frequently can burn a lot of money. The second set of costs are ongoing and include mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, condo fees if you own a condo, utilities, and maintenance as previously discussed. People often make the mistake of only considering the cost of the mortgage when considering how much they should spend to buy a home, but the other factors add up really fast. Another mistake people make is thinking that the available mortgage determines your budget. I often get people saying to me, well, the bank tells me I can spend $1 million on a house. Let me make this very clear. The bank is not your friend. They make money by you staying in debt, so it's in their best interest to give you as much as you can handle, especially when it's secured by an asset. You should spend what you can reasonably afford without making yourself house poor. This is where a good financial planner can help you by putting together a financial plan to ensure that your decision is the right one. So what's the better option, renting or buying? The answer, as always, is it depends. There are several factors to consider, including the amount one has saved for a down payment, the cost of renting versus buying, and the expected amount of time that you would own that home. Unfortunately, most Canadians make the biggest financial decision of their lives without so much as picking up a calculator. Needless to say, this is not a good idea. There are many free resources available online, including rent versus buy calculators that will help guide you in your decision making. And as always, consult with a qualified financial planner for advice. Now let's talk about something that everybody seems to think is a great idea: investing in real estate. When you invest in real estate, you earn return in two ways: rental income and capital gains on the property. It's no secret that rents in cities like Toronto and Vancouver are relatively high, and oftentimes these high rates attract investors. But it can be deceptive. It's important to remember that you don't get to keep the full rent. You still have to pay all the expenses we discussed previously regarding home ownership, plus one new one: taxes. When you factor all this in, it might surprise you to know that current rents in some of these cities are returning very, very low yields. In fact, some recent analyst reports estimate that many recently purchased investment properties are actually negative cash flow. That is to say that the rent does not cover all the expenses associated with the mortgage payment and everything else. Now, this is not all of them, but across the board, low rental yields are pretty common in these cities. So why would people still invest if they're not going to make money off it from the rent? Well, one, they don't do the math, and the second point is that they expect the prices to increase to make up for the low yields. Given that in the last 20 years, Canadians on average have seen housing prices rise well over 200%, factoring in inflation, it's no wonder people think that housing is a great investment. But this is not normal. Just look at this chart going back to the late 1800s. It plots out the average growth rate in real estate prices after subtracting out inflation. As you can see, with the exception of a prolonged drop during both world wars, housing prices in Canada have largely gone sideways until about 20 years ago when they took off like a rocket. What caused this? Many factors. Some of them include easy access to credit and lower interest rates. What I'm trying to show you here is that what we've seen in the last 20 years is not the norm. So buying a rental property expecting history to repeat itself is not likely a wise bet. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't invest in real estate. Every case is different. But what I am saying is don't be one of those people who makes decisions this big without even pulling out a calculator, let alone making sure you get the right advice. Every investment should be judged on its realistic prospects and merits. There is no sure thing. There's no never lose investment in this world, so always use caution. Now that we've covered the financial basics that should be considered when buying or renting, let's talk about what else you should consider. And to do so, I've asked my friend, realtor, and one of the stars of HGTV's Hot Market, David Cinelli, to join me in studio today. So in studio today, we have David Cinelli of Royal LePage. David, thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Tell us a little bit about what it is you do.
Where do I start?
Wherever you want.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm a realtor, so like I don't know how far back you want to go, but I've been a realtor about 4.5, and this may actually be trading for about 5 years. And in that time, I got to top 2% nationally with Royal LePage last couple of years. Last few years have been about 1%, the top 1% of the Toronto Real Estate Board. But much like yourselves too, I do have a financial background. So, but I've owned rental properties for, I guess, almost 14 years now.
And your family far longer than that.
Oh, well, absolutely. Yeah, my dad started like when he was 20. After his dad passed away, so back in those days, it would just made more sense for them to, purchase real estate and earn a lot of wealth that way. And going to the banks and being able to figure out how to leverage it, and grew a nice little portfolio for himself. And then,
safe to say that your family, you've been in this space for a very long time in
very
various
long
capacities.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the factors other than the financial ones we just talked about when it comes to renting. What should renters consider before they sign a contract?
We're saying for a contract for renting,
renting.
Okay. Well, obviously, you want to look to make sure that you can afford the property. Like as landlords, we also check. I'm a landlord as well, as we mentioned before. We make sure you can afford it, right? And you also have to look at some of the costs. So, is it all inclusive? Are you paying? Do you have to pay utilities? Are you able to afford that? What about? And you got to remember things like groceries and parking and Uber and those kinds of things that go into it. So you probably, some rule of thumb I've heard before is you're only supposed to spend maybe 1/3 of your monthly income on rental properties if you are renting, because there are a lot of costs that people don't necessarily think about.
They look at the rent and they think that's it.
Yeah.
But factors like how much more I'm going to have to pay to get to and from work, depending on, if I live downtown, it may actually be more economical than living somewhere in the suburbs and paying less rent if you factor in, you have to drive, right? If you have to drive, then parking and gas could really eat up a lot of money.
Absolutely. You also have to live.
Exactly.
And I don't know about you, but I enjoy not so much now that we have the family and the kids, but if you are the younger person, you want to go downtown, you want to enjoy.
I wish I still lived downtown. Let's just say that much. Yeah.
Exactly. You want to go have a couple of drinks and relax and be able to that. So you do have to factor that in.
Lifestyle.
Lifestyle is a big part of it, right? So I would 100%. And now you're seeing some of the rents, and downtown core is getting, pretty crazy, I would say. And that's why a lot of times my clients will come to me and will say, well, I'm spending this amount of money, and we pull back. We do pull out a calculator. We figure out, okay, if you were not to be in the downtown core, if we can get you somewhere along the subway line, you might only be 15, 20 minutes away. Now you're on the subway line, but you can, your lifestyle doesn't change that much.
Yeah.
that might make more sense. Now you're actually cash more in your pocket if you're not renting the downtown core. So those are kinds of things we would talk about. Obviously, as a landlord, I love having renters. So I'm never going to say like, everyone stop renting. Yes. That's just not my thing, right?
Yeah, it's not for everybody also, right? Like whether it be the amount of time they're going to live in a city before they want to move to another neighborhood, or just financial constraints. So okay, so that's the rental side. Let's talk about what is it you should consider before buying.
So this is one of the reasons why I became a realtor. I had dealt with a number of realtors beforehand, buying, selling, and the one thing that added a lot of stress, a tons amount of stress, was not knowing the whole cost, what happened in the whole process, just lack of information from the realtors I was using before. It was pretty bad, to be honest with you.
In all honesty, most people's experience is probably like that. It's simply, they get it down to the least amount of work, which is essentially, okay, let's go make an offer, end of story, and then they don't get into the land transfer taxes and other things like that.
Which I find is unbelievably wrong. Like I do a lot of first-time home buyer seminars, and what we actually have, and before you even jump in a car with me and go look at properties, I sit you down, I tell you all the costs. I show you how to budget for those costs. I want to make sure you've talked with a mortgage broker beforehand. We can figure out how much you can afford, not necessarily how much your top end afford, but in order to live your lifestyle, what can you afford to purchase? Yeah, you said before, like, the bank can give you $1 million.
Doesn't mean you should spend them.
Doesn't mean and I would 100% say that we'd run the numbers with them. Like, okay, how much does it cost per month? What's your budget like here? What are your budgets now? Like, if you're able to spend this, yes, does this make sense?
The bank doesn't care if you can afford to go on a vacation or not, right?
Absolutely,
but you do. Right?
Of course. And listen, the bank keeps giving me more money, like, because I do buy a lot of rental properties, and like you said, the more you're in debt, and you're able to cover those debts, they will love to give you more money. They just love giving you more money. And honestly, they don't care, right?
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, that's one thing I made sure what we do. We sit down, we run the cost review. Because again, that was something that I never had. So when I give, and you get to go home with a pamphlet, you get to see like what an agreement of purchase and sale actually looks like. And there's plain language below it, so you're not signing anything that...
It's all in legalese.
Yeah, everything. And it's also like, we also have a buyer representation agreement, which shows you, like, again, you're not, I always tell people never, ever sign something you haven't read. And I put
For the record, that's just a good rule for life. Continue.
Of course.
But most people don't do that.
Did you know what I bought?
Some level of trust,
I bought 2 or 3 properties. I didn't even know I signed a buyer representation
Well, it's
agreement.
buried in like 6 other documents,
Well,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
My point is that I always try to be open communication. I only work with people that want to work with me. That's the other thing. So if I'm showing you all this information I'm gathering, I want to make sure that that you're comfortable with me, that I'm honest with you. But the second thing is, by giving you all this information and getting through all the stress, which, let's be honest, the budgeting, the unknowns, for example, when a deposit is due, which is in 24 hours, can cause a lot of stress.
Absolutely.
If you don't know those kinds of things, it's going to be very stressful. And my real estate coach actually says, he goes, buying real estate, and he actually has a study, says it's on the top 10 most exciting things, top 10 most exciting things you could do in your life, but it's also the top 10
most stressful things.
But my job is to make sure you get out of the stress, and the reason why people get stressed is that they don't know.
They're not educated.
They're not educated.
Yeah, good. So, excellent. So all those considerations, basically what your real message is get organized, similar to mine, get the right advice. And that means not just the proper realtor, it could mean your financial advisor, it could mean a mortgage broker, it does mean the bank, but nevertheless, that team is going to prevent you from making big mistakes. So let's talk about the tipping point between renting and buying, right? So at what point, or what factors should be considered when people are going to jump from one to the other?
Well, we talked about, like, looks at cost of rent.
Absolutely.
Right? And when you do have, and we talked a little bit about leases, for example, in place.
Yes.
You are legally allowed to increase rent after your 1-year lease is up. Now, if your property is built, I think now they made this stipulation after 2018, I believe it was. They can increase your rent whatever they want if their building's built after 2018.
Yeah.
So if you're going from rent from $2,000, all of a sudden they jump to $4,000.
That's legal, sadly.
That's legal. Unfortunately, that might be something to push you. And the other thing is that we talked about, like, what are your budget? If you are close to the end of your budget and you are renting, and you're saying, yeah, there's been 3-4 years, and you're like, and now like you're spending like $3,000-4,000, and we can get you into a property which now you can actually pay down your mortgage, even with the expenses, and it makes sense. Yeah, you might be outside the downtown core. That's kind of the tipping point, I would say.
That's a key consideration, right? Because it's not, the rent you're paying downtown versus the cost of buying out in, say, Georgetown, for example. That's night and day, right? You're not comparing the same thing. That rent may be completely reasonable and a very low rate of return for the landlord who owns it, but the property price drop to move out to Georgetown could be enough to basically make up the difference for you and actually make it realistic.
Right, absolutely. So, the same thing you said, it all depends on what your goals are. I have a client now, they might be moving, they're looking to purchase it, but they have a plan in place. We're looking for something for them just for 5 years. And after the 5 years, it has to be rentable. So looking for a duplex. So they're going to live in one unit, they're going to rent out, which helps cover their mortgage because the rent, and they're going to live in the property which is not going to yield as much. They don't mind living in that one because the upper unit is going to be nicer and it's going to carry a big portion of their mortgage. Now they have a plan. In the 5 years, they're going to move out of town and rent both of them out. At that point, they already have a closed mortgage. The 5-year mortgage is going to be less, so their cash flow is going to be a little bit better. But they do want to live somewhere. They currently have a condo downtown, which right now, that's another factor the reason why they're selling. There's going to be a special assessment on this property. There's going to be a lot of factors which, even if they kept this one as a rental, it's not going to make economic sense for them to keep it. They're actually going to be in a cash flow deficit position. So that is the reason why they're going to sell this property and put the equity into this one, but they do have a plan. And we've discussed this plan. It's not like they just came to me and said, I don't know what to do. I'm like, we're going to do this. I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. If you don't have a plan, I always get somebody like yourself, like, I don't know, the viewers probably don't know, but me and you talk
quite frequently,
a lot, and we bounce ideas a lot off each other.
Yep.
I say, and I'll send you clients, and I'll say, what do you think about this, and and use vice versa. And the reason why is because we work together. We're not against each other, and we do have a lot of conversations. Like as a landlord, so we've had a number of conversations. Like I think you should buy, I think you should rent. But it all depends, again, whether the tipping point is.
Exactly, for that person.
And it all depends where you are in your life. Now, exactly, if you're coming from a divorce situation, and we've had before, and I had one client, he just wanted to buy right away. He had enough equity. He goes, I don't want no particular, he had no appetite.
Those are dangerous situations because more often than not, the people who are getting divorced don't want that event in their lives setting them back in any way, right? So they oftentimes go out and will want the same lifestyle they had before. And they'll want the house, they'll want whatever else is. And unfortunately, when you look at it, divorce is one of the #1 leading causes of bankruptcy. So, more often than not, and part of your job and mine is hoping to try to pare back some of that emotion and try to counter that with reason, it's a very sensitive moment, but it can happen.
Yeah, I had the same, so I had one of my clients who, she's got divorced, she's actually separated. Her good friend was the same thing, they had a realtor, they were going to use me, and I said, why are you looking to sell this property? Now, at that point, they weren't getting enough. I'm like, if your husband buys you out, and we looked at her financial situation, I'm like, you should not be buying. Like, you're going to be bankrupt so fast.
It happens all the time. They want to keep the family home, but that home was supported by 2 people. One income is often not enough to support that.
And that's why I said, I'm like, you need to rent. And not to mention, dude, now you're moving from, where do you want to? Like, do you want to be in this neighborhood? Like, do you want to be close? And they were just purchasing somewhere just to be somewhere close, and they didn't care about the neighborhood. I'm like, that's dangerous because you haven't done your research. You don't know. You're just getting into something, and you think you have to buy. No, sometimes I say to them, no, like, let's rent for a bit. Make sure you like that area.
Make the decision. Yeah, exactly. Why don't you test it out before you get into it? And you brought up an interesting case earlier, with the one where they're planning on owning it for 5 years and then moving out of the city. I mean, clearly these people have equity, and you've gone through it with them to make sure that this makes sense. But a lot of times people will get into these types of situations, and they want to own a house for, say, 5 years and then move somewhere else. Well, I have to tell you that's a very risky proposition, right? Because in general, like we said, last 20 years market was spectacular, but there's even been massive dips over short periods of time. I mean, recently we still haven't reached previous peaks, I believe, and that was 4 years ago. So that was a big
2 years.
2 years ago. 2 years ago. So
actually 3. Yeah, I was in 2017.
So if you bought 3 years ago, you could still actually be worth less than you are right now. So these things happen, despite the fact that most people want to believe they don't. And I get why you don't think that way. You maybe sell a house every 10 years, right? The odds of it being down over 10 years are pretty slim historically, right? So if you're going to own for less than 5 to 10 years, you are taking a fair degree of risk with the highly leveraged property. And the thing about the bank in leverage is that when you buy with the house and you sell at a loss, the bank never loses money. They always get paid first, right? It's you who takes the hit, right? So it's very important to contemplate that.
Yeah, so 2 points on that. When I tell clients, when you're purchasing a property, it should always be the long term.
Absolutely.
Like, yes, you need like, so I don't, if you're speculating, so like, obviously I
You
help
want
clients.
3 years rent, like, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm like, this has to be long-term. And what we're saying long-term, you said, at least, if you're looking less than 5 years, you're speculating, you are taking a huge risk.
Absolutely.
And anybody who's purchasing even these pre-construction condos, which we'll talk, we'll
talk about those in a second.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that's a different story. But, they're speculating, and there's some, now the numbers are getting ridiculous. But if you are speculating, if you're less than 5 years, I'm like, you might be in trouble.
Absolutely.
And I say that. And regardless, and then if you look at the long-term plan, okay, you will help yourself. Historically, in the last 30 years, we've had about a 6.6% return per annum.
Yeah.
We've gone run those numbers. But like you said,
But
there's
historically,
dips.
it was actually closer to 0 when you subtract that inflation, right? You subtract that inflation.
Yes.
If inflation was 3, the growth was probably around 3, right?
Yeah.
With all those up and down dips. But yeah, we've had this unprecedented run up. So let's talk about pre-construction. What is the deal with pre-construction, and what was it like before? What is it like now?
So I used to love selling pre-construction and purchase pre-construction. And there's 3 main sellers I had on it. One was that it was below market value because you were buying things off of a plan.
Yeah, that didn't exist, right? You're taking some degree of risk as to when it's going to get done,
Correct.
when you're going to receive it, and we've seen these things always get pushed out several years.
Correct. Yeah. So it's like usually in 4 years together. Second thing was that the deposit. The deposit, like sometimes you couldn't qualify for the mortgage. That's the third thing. You didn't have to qualify for the mortgage. So first, the deposit structure is you don't have to pay 20% right off the bat. And even currently, most of them still do that.
Yeah.
There are a couple companies and one big name company. They make you pay the deposit within 365 days. So that no longer exists, but if it's spreading out over 4 years.
Yeah.
And then now the mortgage, some of the companies are actually now requesting you get a full mortgage approval within that 10-day cooling down period. So a 10-day cooling down period in a pre-construction, what is, you go in, you pick your unit, you sign, you pay $5,000 deposit, you take this document, you bring it to your lawyer reviews it, make sure everything's kosher. Once you're okay with that, you can move forward with it, then you have to pay the remainder of that 5% upon that 10 days.
And that 10-day cooling period exists in all contracts in this province, with the exception of auto dealers, which is an interesting topic.
Which is interesting, yes.
But yeah, so 10-day cooling off period then.
Yeah, so then in that time, we used to do what we call a pre-approval beforehand.
Yes.
A bank would give you a letter. It really didn't mean much because we don't know what's going to happen in 4 years.
Exactly.
But these banks now, now these builders are saying, no, now we need to, they're leveraging it. They're making you get a full approval.
Yeah.
So those 3 things, those 3 factors. 1, it was below market value. 2, you had the deposit structure, which was longer. And 3, you didn't need a firm approval. All those have all been diminished.
That last point goes back to my point about what's happened in the market. So a big reason why they moved to that a couple of years ago was because when we had that dip in the market 3 years ago, all kinds of pre-construction deals went to close. And now everybody went back to the bank and said, okay, I need that mortgage now. And they're like, wait a sec, that house you bought on a pre-construction for $1 million, you can't sell that for more than 800. We're not going to give you the money. You got to come up with the extra 200,000. And so many of these people ended up in situations where they lost their deposits because of it. So it's no surprise that the builders are saying, I don't want to deal with this if there's another correction. So go get a full approval. Forget this pre-approval stuff.
Right. But that only happened after that small dip, and what happened before.
Was it a small dip?
Yeah. It was. It really was. It was a couple of months of correction.
But it was a big correction.
If you bought before that, it was like you were buying at a discount. So if you bought pre-2017 or those numbers, it was the pre-construction wouldn't catch up to what were the resale value. So it kind of buffered that. Now I'm getting worried because we're looking at, and we've had this discussion before, people aren't pulling out calculators and calculating, right?
No.
So they're looking right now, I'm like, oh, okay, but they're looking what the pre-construction market is, and what these builders are now doing is they're selling these pre-construction condos, and they're adding some inflation in there too. What these properties will be worth, they think, in 4 years. And there's a big problem with that. As you can imagine, we don't know where the market's going to be in 4 years.
Well, now you're not getting rewarded for taking the risk, right?
No.
You're not getting a discount for taking the risk.
100%. And you don't even know what the condo looks like on the inside.
That's true.
You don't have to rely on me to explain, okay,
Maybe
I
they
can
cut
show
back
you,
on materials.
and I literally have to walk people through and pull out a measuring tape. I'm like, this is where your bathroom is. This is this size of your closet. Like, oh, it's a lot smaller than we thought. Yeah, because on paper it looks great, but until you actually pull out a calculator and pull out a measuring tape,
unless you have a figure that's the scale that you can put down there and see how big you are, it's hard to tell.
And I'm like, so this bedroom looks a good size. I'm like, you'd be lucky to get a queen in that. They're like, come on, it's so and so. I'm like, go measure your bedroom. And I'm saying, they're just surprised. Or for example, you have to have, a bedroom needs to have a window in it. And I've had to sell condo units. This is hilarious. That they put the bedroom in the middle of the floor, and they have a window which looks inside the kitchen. So your window, the natural light that you're getting is from inside.
It's non-direct.
Now, but that being said, I've purchased 4 pre-construction condos and one this past year, right? But I ran the numbers.
And I'll tell you, we've had clients come to us and say, I want to buy this pre-construction, and whether investment or to live in. And we look it up and we say, that looks expensive. And then we look at comparables in the area and we're like, this makes no sense. You want this price for a condo that's not going to be done for 4 years. Yet meanwhile, this condo closed last year and it's cheaper. You could literally, in some of these cases, buy something down the street, comparable size, comparable design, that is already existing for less. So, and people, we've talked about this before. I mean, my belief is frankly that, this is the lowest cost of speculation. So a lot of real estate speculators get in because of the timeline and the amount of time that they have to close these things. But unfortunately, they've driven the price to the point where you're behind the 8 ball the day you sign that contract.
Correct.
Yeah.
They do add now. The funny thing is like they say now they're adding free assignments.
No, so what they're doing, again, this is for the condo speculators. So essentially, I can sell my pre-purchase condo to the next guy who thinks the market's going to be even hotter.
Correct.
Right? But again, you're still behind the 8 ball. When you signed and you had, a discount, let's call it, 15%, whatever it was, off of what it was going to sell for as of today, but 4 years down the road, there was money to be made there from day one. Whereas now, essentially, you need the market to grow first and foremost just to break even.
Right.
So, this is what's known as the greater fool's theory. You keep on selling to someone else who just hopes to sell to someone else at a higher and higher price.
Right. Now, if you look at personally, like on my personal,
Yep.
my Instagram page or my Facebook and all that too, we have a pre-construction manager, and he manages them. Because there's a big market for it, obviously, and he sends us we get tons and tons and tons of listings of things or projects that are coming up. If you look at my Instagram, there's only a few that I've actually taken, run the numbers, and I'll endorse.
Yep.
And the reason why is that, there's one that's coming up too, and it's like, if it has a celebrity, it's just going to sell for more. So and the price point is actually, and the price point wasn't too bad. So that's why I said I didn't mind that. Celebrities
are endorsing condos. That's
Right.
that's how much money there is in this game.
But that's not the one I purchased. The ones I purchased are actually close to my house, and I know the area, and I know they're undervalued,
Yep.
and the current price, because I've actually seen the prices go up. So
And
my
you've
wife
done the math.
Oh, 100%. And we looked at the current rents, what they're renting at now. When I said to my clients, we run numbers and stuff too, and I'm like, where are we at now? And if they're coming to me and it's like, I'll be honest, most of the time somebody like, what do you think about pre-construction? I'm like, we run the numbers, let's buy this condo. If you want to, first of all, if you want to live in it, it's totally different. Why would you wait?
Why wait 4 years? That could be 6.
And what happened with a couple of, I'm not going to say any names, what happened, there was a project which was north of the city, north of Toronto. I'm not saying where it is or in the name. They had built 2 towers, which was fine, and they assumed that they can get another 2 towers. So they fully sold out of the towers. Now, with a pre-construction, what they usually need to do, and this was pre the big boom, where the money, they didn't actually factor in a lot of inflation in this one. The problem with that was that they didn't hold any of their units back. So the smart builders, what they'll do is they'll sell a stack, and then they'll increase the price to sell another stack. And again, wherever it is.
Yeah. So that they're participating in market upside themselves.
Exactly. So they are. These guys sold it all front, and they never got the approval from the city. They sold everything before the approval. Then they went to the city and said, okay, good, we already approved. They assume that it took them over a year to even get approved, which pushed back all of the construction date. And during that time, they had that strike with the drywallers, which the inflation
drove up the cost yet again.
Drove up the cost. So it literally got to the point where this builder, if they actually built, were going to be in the red.
So they just handed back everybody's money.
0 interest.
Yep, that's it. And this is the risk you take with these things.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, let's talk about, give me 3 tips for what you think everyone needs to consider before buying any property.
Before purchasing any property, A, obviously know the area you're going to be in.
Yes.
100%. Okay. B, know your finances. Know what your costs are going to be when they're going in, and that includes all of them. That includes your land transfer tax. Is it in Toronto? We have double land transfer tax.
Unfortunately,
lawyer fees, which I explain that. And the third and most important thing is have a good support team. That includes your realtor, that includes your financial planner, and includes your mortgage broker. Because without having them working together, you're not going to know what the market is, whether you're getting a good deal or not. B, you're not going to know if you can afford it. And then
the biggest purchase of your life could be the biggest mistake of your life.
Exactly. And most importantly, are you going to be happy with the purchase?
Absolutely.
So those 3 things have to work together.
Absolutely. So before we go, where can people find you, Dave?
Well, find me all over the internet.
That is true. That is true.
No, so you can always call or text me 416-876-9998 if you want to do that. Yeah, it's pretty brave. I know I do get some, I do answer. I do get some funny text messages, but obviously, if you do that, you're going to get blocked. And if you show up, and if it comes up a number blocked, I don't answer it. You can always email me dcinelli@royal@page.ca. But alternatively, I'm on Instagram at David V. Cinelli Realtor. I'm on.
Just Google you.
Just Google
everything from HGTV to every social media outlet.
I'll be around.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'll be around.
Well, David, thank you so much for coming in today.
No problem.
Thank you. And thank you again for joining us for The Wisdom of Wealth. where hopefully today we did a little bit more to increase your financial literacy and help you make better decisions around your real estate purchases. Until next time, take care.